Are most of the properties on Airbnb?
So all of our stuff is on multiple platforms. Airbnb tends to be the leading one, but that's kind of what we talk about distribution. We're on Airbnb, VRBO, Expedia, Booking, Hopper, Wednesday. There's a bunch of them.
Interesting. And was it like that from day one, or was it mainly Airbnb?
From day one, we listed across multiple platforms. That tends to be a competitive advantage. Now we've added a few over time. But yeah, from day one, if you list only on Airbnb, you're definitely leaving some on the table.
Interesting. And what do you use to manage all that?
So we have an integrated property management software that's a combination of what they call a distribution tool and a channel manager. What that basically allows you to do is to have one synchronized calendar across Airbnb, VRBO, Expedia, your own website, so that if a guest books on Airbnb, it automatically blocks off the calendar on the other platforms. It's also a place where you centralize all your messages, where you can push out all your pricing in one go. So if you want to update pricing to a unit, it'll update it across VRBO, Expedia, all those platforms in one go. And so most property managers today use some combination of those two tools, because that's really what you need if you want to be competitive.
Okay. Well, Franklin, thanks so much for joining. For those tuning in, Franklin is the co-founder of French Cowboys Management. They are a vacation rental management company here in Austin. They manage over 115 different vacation units, and they started the company in 2021, bootstrapped it, and have grown it into quite a business. So thanks for chatting vacation rentals and life in small business world, Franklin.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Will. Excited to be here.
To kind of pick off where we left off, are you typically, from a pricing perspective, having the same price across Airbnb and the other platforms?
Yes. So that's actually something that's typically mandated by what we call the OTAs, which are the online travel agents. So I think Airbnb, VRBO, Expedia, they typically require you to have the same pricing across those platforms. The main reason they do that is what they don't want you to do is to list 20% higher on Expedia and then on your own website to offer a discount, because most modern shoppers are pretty savvy and will look across different platforms. So that's typically something that you need to maintain, is what they call price parity. Now, this has been something in the hotel space that people have been playing around with for a while. There are some workarounds. You can, even at the same price, offer an upgrade or an early check-in or these kind of things that makes it more attractive for people to book directly on your website. But typically, yes, you need to maintain some kind of price parity.
Got it. And if you're booking from the website, you're typically saving on whatever rate those OTAs are taking.
Correct. There's typically a dual advantage. The first one is that you own the customer. A lot of these platforms, because they want you to keep returning on the platforms, will keep some of the guest information, like proprietary email, payment information. And it's just more difficult because you have to go through the platform to message them.
Sure.
So from a guest satisfaction and just from an ability to market to these guests, having them book direct is better. And then, of course, you can also save a significant amount of fees. I mean, to give you a sense, most OTAs charge today between 10 to 20%. So it can be pretty significant if you get these people off platform.
Got it. And I know over the past couple of years, the whole idea of kind of managing Airbnb and vacation rentals has blown up, and people are even running courses now. So if we rewind the clock a little bit, y'all started in 2021 in Austin. Last I heard, Austin has anywhere from like 10 to 15,000 different Airbnb listings. Obviously a ton of travelers. I think the average revenue per Airbnb listing is something around like 24 to 60K. Y'all probably have more up-to-date information than I do. What attracted y'all to start this business?
I think, like most good ideas, it wasn't fully thought out. It was more opportunistic than something we'd naturally planned out for. What happened is when I first moved to Austin, I was living with my co-founder, and we essentially had no income. And we realized that if we went to go stay with a friend for the weekend and crash on his pad, we could actually, essentially doing that 2 weekends a month, cover the cost of the mortgage of the home we were staying on. So at first it was really a way for us to not pay for rent.
Sure.
And then what happened is, as we started doing that, a couple of friends reached out. We're like, hey, I know you guys are managing an Airbnb. Would you have any interest in doing mine? Now, this was also, I'll mind you, during kind of the Airbnb, I would say, golden age in Austin, which was COVID. Austin was one of the most popular places for people to relocate. And so really, obviously, this had been happening for a while, but overnight demand really exploded. A lot of people trying to relocate for anywhere from a week to 3 months. And so there was big shortage of supply and a lot more demand. So it was just a really good time to be in the business.
That's awesome. And just so folks know, it's not like you and Dylan were bums having nothing to do in life. You also had another company on the side. You just weren't able to pay yourself that much from it at the time.
Correct. I think we originally got into this business because we wanted to start a hotel company. Now, finding the capital to buy a hotel, do hotel management just took longer than we expected. And so as we were putting those first few projects together, managing short-term rentals was kind of a quicker way for us to understand, the complex operations of hospitality, but also to generate some cash, start hiring some people, and really kind of dipping our toes into the space.
And during that golden era, at least in Austin, where there was so much imbalance of people coming for a weekend or a week and wanting a place to stay, and there not being enough hotels or even Airbnb supply to afford that, I know a lot of people got into buying homes explicitly to then do vacation rentals on. And it was more of an investment play. Nowadays, what do you see as the breakdown between the percentage of your clients who, hey, this is just another home I'm trying to monetize, this is a second home, versus, hey, I bought this solely to rent out and I'm going to use French Cowboys Management to do so?
I'd say probably 75 to 80% of the people whose homes we manage are pure investments.
Okay.
So, to your point, this is something that has really blown up. There's definitely been a little bit of an oversaturation in the market. I think, as I kind of mentioned, COVID was the golden era, a lot of remote work, a lot of people traveling. And I think like a lot of times, that's when, the classes and the gurus came out. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people oversimplified this space. It became the golden age of passive income. Hey, you can quickly buy a home and automate it with technology. And, by working 5 hours a week, I'm not making more money than I used to be as a banker on Wall Street. And, there were a lot of these things blowing up online. I think running these business day to day shows you one thing. One, it's not passive. It's a very active business. And even though technology can help automate a lot of tasks, you're still in a people business that's operationally complex. And so it's definitely a business that requires, hands-on attention. It's a low margin business. It's also not one where as you scale, suddenly your margins double.
Sure. And to walk through the kind of client user journey. So when you're onboarding new clients, I imagine a lot of them nowadays are coming from word of mouth or referrals from some other client. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. I think at least at our stage in growth, which, we're still a small business managing, just over 100 units, your biggest source of marketing is going to be referrals. This is a business where people tend to trust people that they know and local people. You end up being more in trust and in sync with your property manager. So who's actually the person who's managing your home, then honestly, the property management company, because that's the person you're texting. That's the person who's inspecting your home, who you're speaking to on a regular basis.
And in terms of trying to stand out locally, I know kind of the average Airbnb occupancy rates in Austin are like 60% or so. There's obviously the average daily rate that's advertised as well. Are you trying to market, hey, we can beat the market in terms of occupancy rates, or we can increase your average daily rate through how we market the property on these OTAs?
Sure. My answer here is going to be, to anyone who's listened to other people talk about these companies in the space, a little bit different. I think a lot of people like to position their vacation rental management company as being super differentiated, as saying, the way we market, the way that we price, the way that we operate is so different, then we're going to be able to drive significantly higher, occupancies and rates. We actually don't really see that often pan out. A lot of the very basic services are somewhat commoditized. A lot of people use the same pricing tools. A lot of people have the similar property management software. They distribute in similar areas. And so our view is actually not that we're doing anything that's so different from a pricing, occupancy, or marketing point of view, rather that we're just doing everything a little bit better. So, having the hotel side allows us to have resources that are slightly more qualified than we would be able to have only with our vacation rental business. It also allows us to understand another part of the hospitality space where we can layer in some of those learnings into the vacation rental part. So we use hotel data to understand performance and to guide some of our vacation rental pricing. We use hotel standards for some of the housekeeping procedures that we put in place. We have marketing teams that are bigger because there's a more established way to market hotels than there is vacation rentals today. And so we have every step of the way these small differentiators. Now, I do remain convinced that most property managers can get to 70 to 75% of the performance by just following these simple steps. And anyone who claims that they have such a revolutionary way of marketing that's going to allow them to significantly beat the market, I think is often overselling themselves because there is not a big brand element to it. And I think that's something that we might dive into it afterwards. But hotels typically have a brand. And so people, will go to a Marriott because that's a place where there's a point system and they know what to expect. Because vacation rentals are all different, it's very hard to create standards or brand loyalty because every single home is designed different and looks a little bit different. And so it's really hard to differentiate yourself from that point of view.
Got it. So it becomes more of a quality of service and just attention to detail.
100%. I think what people consistently look for and what really matters is housekeeping. Can you make sure the units are consistently clean? Because, as we know in hotels and vacation rentals, that's the most important thing. People don't want to think about the fact that another guest was staying there 24 hours before them. And then customer service. Are you addressing issues as they arise? Are you communicating in a friendly and professional manner? Those are by far the most important things in my opinion.
Okay. And so y'all meet a prospective client, let's say it's a referral. What is the process of onboarding the client? What do the kind of unit economics typically look like with them?
In terms of the onboarding process, how it typically works, the first thing that we like to do is a tour of the home. Until you really get eyes on the property, it's hard to have an educated discussion with the owner about opportunities, about pain points, about operational issues. So we typically like to have our business development lead go tour the property with the owner and also understand the owner's goals here. Some owners are solely financially motivated, and these are people who bought these properties as investments and want to understand how they were going to maximize their bottom line number. Some other owners, however, that's not their goal. Some people who have a secondary home that they like to use but want to make some extra cash on the side might be more worried about maintaining quality and making sure that the home is not used for a party or for certain types of events, and be willing to forsake some revenue because they want to set a minimum price that's going to allow them to maintain a certain type of guest demographic. And so I think for us at first is I'm really understanding what the goal of the owner is, what it is that he's optimizing for, any operational complexities, typically access points, storage, linens, laundry on site, and what are the amenities? Is this something that we're going to need to have a landscaper come to once, twice a week? What does the pool look like? How old is the home? The older the home is, the more there's some repair and maintenance issues. And clearly explain to the owner as well, what are the tasks that we're going to do and what are the things we're not going to take care of? Foundational issues, large plumbing issues. Those are things that'll be outside of our scope. So I'd say it's really about understanding his goals, about setting clear expectations about responsibilities, communication, how things are going to work. But then once we've actually agreed to those things and we sign a contract with the owner, onboarding happens pretty quickly. Really, the main things are creating the listings, getting the information around, Wi-Fi, access points, locks, that kind of stuff with the owner. But within 2 weeks, we can typically go live. And that's our commitments to the owner is 2 weeks from the moment that he signs, his property can be live and accepting bookings.
And is there a typical investment that owners having to make into locks or, slight touch-ups to the house in order for them to have the best chance of, hitting whatever goals they have?
Assuming that the house is furnished, the typical upfront investments is photography. That's probably the number one thing that we will encourage owners to invest in is high quality of photography. If you've ever booked a vacation rental or a hotel before, you know that 80% of the decision is made by the couple hero shots that you see. And so getting cheap photography or using an iPhone is definitely not something we recommend. In an ever competitive landscape, you really want to stand out from the get-go. So photography, ideally, we like installing keypad locks as much as possible. Anything that requires a physical key is complicated. Guests lose them, they misplace them, they malfunction. So they're good as a backup, but we always recommend having some kind of a Yale lock or a Schlage lock. Then the third thing is typically professional grade linens. More and more, we encourage owners to use white linens for two reasons. One, they more closely resemble the hotel level experience that people are used to today.
Sure.
And two, linens that we use tend to not need to be ironed, which is really important as well when you're trying to be efficient and minimize your housekeeping costs. You can essentially use these non-iron linens that constantly look like they've just been pressed or go resist a lot of washes as well, because you're going to wash these a lot more regularly than you would for residential linens. And they have that hotel-like look that people really appreciate when they arrive in a home.
Got it. Ballpark wise, how much money is that if you were to get all three?
Typically, photography, let's just say you had, a 2-3 bedroom house, will be anywhere from $300 to $500, depending on how many shots you want. The locks is going to be, another $350 usually, and that's counting the cost of installation. And then the linens, depending on your bed count, we typically recommend that people buy at least 2 sets, so that if the housekeeper doesn't have time to fully wash the linens, she can put another set on and come back and wash them later before the next guests arrive. That might cost you another $1,000, let's say. And that's counting, towels, sheets, linen, washcloths, everything. So I'd say overall, your startup cost, if you think somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500, that's probably a good, place to earmark. Now, the one thing that we do for our clients is we understand that some people don't want to come out of pocket, especially since they've already purchased the property and they've, might have used some kind of mortgage or financing. And so they don't want to come out of pocket more. If that's the case, we're happy to typically front the money and then to deduct it out of revenue over the next few months and to kind of make it less financially burdensome for someone to get started.
Okay. And then in terms of how much y'all charge, is there any upfront fee or is it just a percentage of the revenue?
No, the only upfront fee are really kind of the things we talked about, which are, purchases by the owners. Outside of that, no other startup costs on our end. We only really start making money once the owner starts generating revenue. That's pretty typical in this space. It operates as a revenue share model. So we essentially take a percentage of the top line. Again, depending on the type of the unit, it changes a little bit, but market standard hovers around 25%, all the way up to 30, all the way down to 20, but that's kind of where we're seeing the market rationalize today. And that's on rooms revenue, net of housekeeping fee and taxes. So really our pitch here to owners and how we view it is we are fully incentivized to generate as much revenue as possible for the owner, because we only make money if they make money. If any owner doesn't get any revenue, we also don't make any money, but we have fixed expenses with, labor, software, office marketing. So we're definitely incentivized to drive bookings.
Got it. And then if there are any things outside of housekeeping that come up, whether it's landscaping you mentioned or minor kind of home improvement repairs, that's passed off directly to the homeowner and isn't net of the revenue that you guys fee against.
Correct. So if you kind of think about it, you've got the top line rooms revenue. Housekeeping is an expense that is passed on to the guests. So, if you've booked an Airbnb, you've typically seen a housekeeping fee. So that is passed on to the guests. And we essentially use that to pay our housekeepers and to replenish supplies, laundry detergents, soaps, shampoos, that kind of good stuff. Repair and maintenance. So anything minor that is just considered wear and tear, paint touch up, those kinds of things, replacing light bulb, HVAC filters, those are things that are billed back to the owner and will show up on the owner expenses. And that is net of our fee. So it comes out afterwards. Any damages caused by guests, guest breaks a piece of furniture, mistreats the house, those are things that we will go after the guest for. And Airbnb actually has an insurance policy for that. And we have additional insurance policy as well that we use in case of damages. So those are things that will typically be billed back to the guest or covered by the platform. And then ongoing recurring expenses, things like landscaping, pool service, if applicable, those kinds of things are typically agreed to upfront with the owner, where we talk about his expectations and his goals. Landscaping, it can be as little or as much as they want. And those things are then billed back to the owner and show up as an expense after our fee. So you'll have, $1,000 of rooms revenue. We'll charge 25%. So that'll leave him with $750. And then after that, he may have additional expenses and that would be deducted from there.
Got it. And on the housekeeping side, do you typically try to bake in margin for yourself when you're passing it off to the guest, or is it truly at cost, whatever the 1099 housekeeper charges?
It's a great question because it's one of the more, I'd say, contentious parts in the industry. Historically, we actually ran our housekeeping department at a loss. And what we realized is that those losses were becoming quite significant. And so we essentially, and we're pretty transparent with this, our goal is to operate our housekeeping department at a 20% margin. 20% essentially allows us to cover our software cost and then some labor to actually manage the housekeepers, plus some extra margin in there in case, things go awry. The numbers kind of vary month over month. Some months will run at a 10% margin, some months at a 25. So things kind of move, but on average, we've been able to maintain that margin over the last kind of 6 to 9 months. The reason it is such for people who are seasoned vacation rental owners or operators, a big point of contention is that it is the easiest way for a property manager to take advantage of owners without them realizing it, which is essentially if you lower the nightly rate, let's just say your home typically goes for $1,000 a night and the housekeeping fee is $250. Well, from a guest point of view, he's paying an all-in cost. But if I lower your nightly rate to $500 and increase the housekeeping fee to $750, well, all the housekeeping fee goes to the vacation rental manager and the owner only gets the rooms revenue. So it can be a way for the vacation rental manager to kind of divert funds in his direction. So definitely something to look out for vacation rental owners is to make sure that the housekeeping fee is in line with market standards. Now, the flip side I will say on that is housekeeping is expensive. It is a competitive industry, and especially in markets like Austin, for good housekeeping, you need to pay up. The cost of supplies have gone up, especially if you want good soaps, good shampoos, laundry detergents, toilet papers, those kinds of things. So it is also important to not underinvest in that area. So finding the right balance is really important.
Sure. And I imagine there's also some amount of conflict between the manager and the homeowner insofar as if you have one of the homeowners who has a really nice home and wants a high price point, not to rent it out all the time, but y'all are having to manage essentially all the project management of landscaping, pool cleaning, whatever other repairs, and you're just not seeing that many bookings come through because of the price, there reaches a point where you're essentially doing free or at cost property management for the underlying home, but you're not making that much for the vacation rentals. Have you ever had to have that conversation of like, hey, you're going to have to lower the price and get this rented more, or we're not going to be able to continue this?
Correct. We actually had to drop a client of this. I'd say for us, it's relatively rare because most of the clients we work with are people who bought these properties as investments. And so if they don't get any revenue, they can't cover their mortgages and they're in a tough financial position. Now, we have come into this issue with people who have these homes as second homes. So we had this high net worth individual who owns this beautiful, call it, $10 million property about 45 minutes west of Austin. We previously managed it for another owner who was very much incentivized and eager to drive as much revenue as possible. This new owner came in and essentially said, hey, I don't want to rent it for anything less than $10,000 a night. However, I want you guys to go out there on a weekly basis and take care of the landscaping, audit all these systems, help with these CapEx projects. And so we found ourselves in this exact position where we were essentially serving as a concierge for this owner, preparing his owner stays, making sure the property always looked in tip-top shape, but generating no revenue from it. And so we had to have that conversation with him. And he basically expressed the fact that he was not interested in renting it out for anything less than this price. And so we ended up actually parting ways.
And one thing that's evolved over time is the regulatory aspect with, different short-term rental licenses, new taxes being rolled out. How does that work in Austin?
Sure. So Austin's actually been a pretty interesting one. The long story short is the regulatory environment has been in a gray area for the last 5 to 10 years. What has happened is as Airbnbs proliferated across the US, but really also a lot of other places in the world, cities have tried to push legislation to one, protect hotels, but to two, also collect taxes, and three, to make sure that housing for the local population was also going to be in sufficient amounts. There's been this, idea that as Airbnbs proliferate, it's removing more and more housing from people who want to live here locally. Now, there is a lot of debate as to, how valid that analysis is. And, you'll read studies on both sides showing that either has an impact on housing prices or not at all. The way it works today is the state of Texas collects hotel occupancy tax, which goes by HOT, to the tune of 6%. So that is something that's automatically remitted to the state of Texas. Most major cities, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, also have a city occupancy tax that oscillates anywhere between 6 to 10%. Austin has had one for the last, 10, 15 years, but has had no way of enforcing it. And so today, out of the 15,000 short-term rentals in Austin, I would say 90% of them are unlicensed. And the reason that's the case is the city of Austin passed legislation that required you to get a license, but then the Texas Supreme Court essentially ruled back, saying that this was unconstitutional. And so we've been kind of at a standstill for the last few years, where the city of Austin mandates this, but essentially has no way of enforcing this rule. Now, as of recent, as of a month ago, and there seems to be a new efforts by the city of Austin to essentially change permitting requirements to make it easier for people to get permits, but to also enforce the tax collection. Their main goal is saying, hey, let's find a way here to collect taxes so they can benefit the city, but also allow people to operate with a license. Again, this hasn't been really pushed out through. And so we're kind of in a waiting pattern for now to kind of see over the next 6 to 12 months how things play out. And I do think that as permitting requirements and taxes start being collected, it's going to create more pressure on certain property managers and on vacation rental owners. And so I suspect that more people will exit the space over time, because the margins are going to become thinner and thinner once you add these taxes and these permit fees. That it's probably going to reduce the amount of inventory in the town.
Interesting. And so those are coming, they're not getting passed off to the guests. They would be essentially eaten by the homeowner?
No, they are being passed off to the guests. But the issue today is that today these taxes just aren't being passed on to any guest. So it makes it cheaper than to stay in a hotel room because in hotels they are. I think as that happens, it's just going to be an extra cost. You now have the city cost, the state cost, you have the Airbnb fee, you have the housekeeping fee. Once you start adding all of those things in, the cost analysis versus a hotel room starts becoming less and less attractive.
Got it. What does the competitive landscape look like today? Like, is it still a majority mom and pop local managers, or are there large kind of corporate owned shops that serve multiple metros?
Sure. I'd say it's still an extremely fragmented space. So there must be, my guess, and I don't know this, but is that there are thousands, if not more, of property managers across the US. Now, there are also a few big players. The one that made most noise was a venture-backed company called Vacasa. They were kind of the biggest player in that space, grew very quickly over the last 5 to 7 years, ended up going public a couple of years ago. A lot of M&A activity was the way that they grew, so they bought a lot of other players in the US. Ultimately, their business model, their cost structure didn't make sense. And so they essentially rode it all the way to the top, went public on a multi-billion-dollar valuation, and then their stock price plummeted and went all the way back down, I think, to $30 or $40 million. And as of recently, they were purchased by a company called Casago. Casago is one of the other large players in the US, scaled very differently, more slowly through less mergers and acquisitions, and actually using a franchise model, which I think is the smarter way to do it, because so much of your success in this business is tied to your ability to operate locally. And so if you can find strong franchisees, it's definitely a model that's proven to be successful. I think that over time, there will be some consolidation in this space, and we're already starting to see it happen. There are more and more of the large players who are trying to grow into new markets through acquisitions. But I also think that it is not going to be a winner-take-all market where there is going to be 4 players. I think there is plenty of room for these small to medium property managers to continue to flourish locally within these markets, because there's a lot of trust built in. It's a business that takes a while to scale, especially if you want to do it without raising funds. And so I see, the medium-term status quo as there will be a few large national players, but because of the inherent obstacle tied to the brands, in my opinion, which is your inventory will never be homogenous. Every home's a little bit different. I think that there will be a lot of space for individual mom and pop property owners to continue to thrive and to flourish really across markets across the world.
Gotcha. And just to kind of walk through the math of how long it takes you to get default alive, so to speak, if you started a vacation rental management business from scratch. I know in Austin, let's say that the average Airbnb makes $40K a year and you're charging 25%. So you get $10K from managing one property. From that $10K, what is kind of the margin that you're running at on the management side?
So I'll say the highest margin part of the business is when you have no employees up front, because that's all essentially pure pass-through. So the tough thing with this business, and where most people end up getting stuck from what I've seen, is scaling, I would say, from 0 to 10 to 15 units typically ends up being what we see a lot of people do, because at that point you can be a one-person operation. It's what me and my business partner did, which is at that point what it requires is one really good housekeeper, one handyman who can help out, and then someone who's just, constantly on their phone, and that's typically the owner of the business, because at that point, you're essentially serving as the property manager. So emailing, text messaging the guest, messaging the housekeeper on when she can, leave and enter the home to clean it, coordinating with a handyman if someone needs to come, restocking the units yourself. And so I'd say the 0 to 10 units is manageable as a one-person operation. Now, it is very tiring because this is a 24/7 business. If a guest messages you at 1 a.m., well, you need to be answering. Same thing the next morning. Same thing with the housekeeper, getting everyone paid. But it is something that can be done as a one-person operation. And so I think that's where most people launch, is they start managing a few, get good traction. And typically, because these are owner-operated businesses, that's when the business does really well. An owner is willing to work 24/7, to answer messages at any time, and to fix issues themselves. And so they typically start getting really good reviews from guests, really good reviews from owners, and a level of involvement that gets everyone really impressed. What becomes challenging then is once you reach 10 to 15 units, it becomes essentially impossible to bring on new inventory without bringing on some staff. And subscale, I would say and again, when we say units, it depends very much on the size of a unit. Very different to manage a one-bedroom apartment than a $10 million ranch, because the fees are very different. But kind of staying in the 40K, revenue figures that you mentioned. What becomes challenging is your first few property managers end up having to also do everything. So they are responding to guests, they are coordinating with housekeepers, with owners, and with repair and maintenance folks. And so that's where it becomes complicated, because when these people are off, well, someone still needs to be working. And so the early days are really challenging because the people in the business basically have to do everything. Where you start seeing a break is once you get to a point where you can have a guest communication team. And that's what we saw as being the most impactful, is once you remove the need for property managers to speak to the guests, that allows the property managers to really focus on, the other places like pricing, like guest communication, like owner communication, repair and maintenance and housekeeping. And then you have a separate team speaking to the guest. That's a big break point that tends to provide a lot of relief to the property managers. It actually allows them to take some time off.
And how many units do you need to be able to afford that?
I would say once you get to 25 units, especially if you utilize offshore resources, which is what we've done, 25 units typically allows you to hire a property manager and some kind of a guest communication resource that can really assist with the off hours, as kind of the math that we've seen. And then once you get to 50 is when you start really being able to build an organization, because you have 2 property managers. You can have, 2 or 3 guest communication people who can be working shifts. So, so you have some people working during the day, some people during the night. So that allows you to have full coverage. And then your 2 property managers can also overlap and have days off. So when one of your property managers is off, the other one's plugging in. So that's when you start, really having an organization that is more self-sustaining. But the really tough part is really kind of like in that, I'd say 10 to 30, because you're no longer doing everything yourself. You have one employee. And so there's a lot of challenges along the way. Once you get above that, it starts becoming a little bit easier, though other challenges arise, of course.
Yeah. And for folks thinking about starting one of these or investing in the acquisition of one, what would you say are the 2 or 3 metrics that are critical to nail? Like, what are you looking at on a weekly basis?
The few things that we look at, one for us is reviews. Review scores are going to be what potential new clients judge your performance on. So, if I'm a property owner, I'm going to want to go see at other listings that the vacation rental manager manages, and to really understand, how are guests feeling about housekeeping, about maintenance, about guest communication. How well are they marketing my property? Are the descriptions attractive? Are the photos high quality? Does the listing make sense? So I'd say overall reviews are super important to us. We track these on a weekly basis, and we have matrices where as soon as properties fall below a certain score, they're put on a list so our team can pay specific attention to drive better results. The second thing for us is owner communication and guest communication. So we basically track, and we have metrics around NPS scores to understand, are our owners happy? How frequently are we speaking to them? What are the volumes of messages that we're having with guests? And, how frequently are we communicating with them? And then the third thing for us is really, revenue for owners and for ourselves. So we have budgets each month tied to management fees, housekeeping fees, repair and maintenance fees. And then we have simple pro formas. So most of the owners who work with us ask us for a financial analysis at the beginning. So we'll put out, a 12-month, 24-month, 36-month analysis. And we like benchmarking against that, to roughly understand, hey, if we told the owner he was going to do $50,000 of revenue, is he on track with that? If not, what do we need to do to address?
Got it. Awesome. And before I let you go, we haven't touched on the name French Cowboys Management. I know you and your business partner are both half French, half American, and building one of many businesses here in Austin. So do you mind sharing how that name came to be?
The name French Cowboys really originated from a funny story. One day, my business partner and I were, touring a piece of land outside of Austin for a potential hotel development. This was probably the 100th piece of land that we'd seen, and we were working with a lot of ranch brokers. And so, we were fresh off of our flight from France, so we were wearing, shorts and linen shirts. It's 105 degrees. These brokers were wearing cowboy hats, the big cowboy boots, Wrangler jeans, and as we're walking one of these properties, we would typically exchange in French when we wanted to talk about pricing or about negotiation tactics if we didn't want the agent to understand what we were saying. And at some point, as we're speaking in French, we were in one of the mules, and the agent turns around to us and says, "Wait, I've heard about you guys. You guys are them Italian cowboys." And so we actually corrected him, letting him know that we were not, in fact, the Italian cowboys, but we could be the French Cowboys. And so that name really stuck. We really liked it, and we ended up using it as the legal name for an LLC that we used to form this business. And it really resonated with people. Got picked up by a Texas Monthly article a couple of years ago. And so we ended up actually fully rebranding and leaning into French Cowboys, which felt like a much better representation of who we were as people in the business that we were building.
Sure. That's awesome. Well, Franklin, thank you so much for coming on. It was fun nerding out and learning more about the vacation rental management business. So.
No, thanks for having me. No, this was definitely exciting. Love chatting with you. And then hopefully we'll do another one of these soon.
Yeah.